Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenMara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight, making sure everything is turned on the right direction. I did this before the stream started, but I always want to double check. So, tonight we are going back to Myth and Tarot, which is an ongoing series where we look at a mythological creature or being and then pull tarot cards to see what it would be like if they were sitting in front of us today. And tonight we're going to wander back into the Greek lore, specifically the Herculean labors, and we're going to meet the Stymphalian birds. And there's a couple ways you can say the name, but that's the one that is how it keeps sticking up in my head. So we'll go with that. Before we get into what Hercules was doing with the birds, let's find out what were the birds exactly. Because they're not as of right now, a live race. So were they ever real? Don't know. On that one, it's very interesting as to what they are. So the Stymphalian birds, or Stymphalian birds, were a bird that lived in the swamps outside of Stymphalia. Okay, well, we're going strong here. Like so many other things in the old legends, the name tends to tie into the creature, like the Lernian Hydra and things like that. So these creatures do not have a single origin story. There's some of them that have one or two. This particular creature, and this baffles me when I was going through the research on it, it has three origin stories. So you can kind of pick which one you resonate with, type of a thing, because, and I could not for the life of me trace back which one is the oldest. They all kind of pop up around the same time, so it could be that these birds were an amalgamation of three separate beings that came together and all three deities took the credit. I don't know, but that's where we're at. So, and as weird as it is, it's getting warmer outside, but for some reason I'm craving tea. So we're doing tea tonight, and it is a orange ginger tea. So one story, and we'll start with the nicer of the three, goes that Artemis, one of the goddesses of the hunt, raised these birds to aid her while hunting. She didn't raise them just for hunting, though. She also wanted some pets, and so she raised these beings as pets. The other, bit more aggressive, Ares, you know, that wonderful creature himself, the god of war, and he didn't like people, really, at all. There's a handful he was okay with. The rest of them, no. Supposedly he created and raised these birds to be a wave of chaos and destruction against those to whom he unleashed them upon. And so they kind of became a sort of aspect of his army, but it's unclear if he actually kept them there or chased them out later. And I'll explain that in a second. In both of these stories, the first two stories, the birds either escaped their respective orders or bred so fast they didn't have room anymore in Olympus and they overflowed out of Olympus. Either way, the birds would migrate to Arcadia and a swamp named Stymphalia, or Stymphalia. Another version, for Ares' line anyway, was that Ares was angry at his creations, and it didn't specify what pissed him off about him, but something made him mad. And so he sent his war wolves, which were his standard to send out and chase things, to hunt the birds, and the birds fled to the land of Arcadia to escape the wolves. Supposedly the wolves didn't want to go in the swamp. Okay. Anyway, before we get into too much more of that, the lake Stymphalian And I think it's this one. Nope, not that one. Where'd it go? I had a picture somewhere in here in my... Now I'm wondering if I actually got it uploaded. Oh no. That's funny. Anyway, the lake Stymphalian is associated with the Christian beliefs. And this was a little strange to me, but it's actually a true statement. I really want the picture. Let me see if I can find it. Sorry. Usually I'm better with my pictures. Either they just don't get loaded all together, or I have all of them. And I did not even get this one in. So this could be interesting. I haven't done this live before, so this... Whoa, way too big. This is the area in Greece where Stymphalian is. But it's been known by other names as well, and it's not always been Stymphalian. Just north of this area is the area or town of Corinthia. So this is actually pretty anchored into Christianity as well, to the point, move that they have found 4 early Christian cemeteries. And there is a sister... I said this right when I was practicing. Sisters... a form of monastery of Zaraka, just north of the town as well, just not far from Corinthia. And it's claimed that there is a lot more Christian remnants there, but a full and proper survey has not been completed. And the most recent data that I could find, even talking about that, was in 2021. So unless something's popped up in the last couple of years, and even if it has, we probably won't hear about it for another however knows how long. But there's a lot of Christian lore that ties into this as well, this area as well. And now we get into the third creation story of the Stymphalian birds. Hera, that sweet and wonderful goddess from Olympia, created the birds to be beautiful and gentle. Sure she did. But they bred so fast, and for some reason this angered Hera. It could have been the sky was blue that day and she just didn't like it. With her, they could have chirped too early. It could have made her mad that they were waking her up, or they didn't chirp early enough. Who knows? Whatever the reason, she decides to curse the birds to grow to a monstrous size. The beaks would be bronze and the feathers would become metallic. Hera has an odd way of dealing with something that annoys her. Make it more annoying and then send it loose on the human world? Thanks, sweetheart. Anyway, so what do these birds look like? This is where things get interesting, because I've read about them before when I've read through Hercules' labors, but I didn't put the description in my head the way they do here. So this is an amalgamation of a lot of different descriptions from different areas, but it kind of gives you an idea of what the origins were, because there's a baseline origin, but each story has a variation. So we're just kind of putting it all together here. This is the start of what we're looking at. This is an ibis. It is the Greek ibis, the shiny, I think, sort of shimmering ibis, but that's this guy. Okay, so it's in the area, hangs out in Africa as well, but this is where we're starting, around the Mediterranean. Now, this one here stands about 2 feet tall, so it's not very big, and it weighs 1 to 2.5 pounds, with a beak that's 4 to 6 inches long. You can see his beak up here. It's significant. It's almost as long as his neck. Not super large, kind of like a long-legged, skinny chicken. That's what this is, okay? That's where we start. And this coloration is important to the future of what we're going to here. That's why I went with this one and not one of the other ibis. I learned a lot about the ibis researching the Stymphalian birds. Ibis are worldwide. I thought they were primarily Egyptian, North African. No, they're all over New Zealand, North America. There's a species that's in South America. They're all over the place. So that was cool to learn. Now picture 2.5 feet tall, this thing. But now take it to the size of a crane. The description was the body and beak of an ibis, but the mass and size of a crane. Okay? These monstrous birds, cranes, can grow between 3 and 5 feet tall, but the ones in the Mediterranean area, where this would be, generally are between 4 and 5 feet tall. So you're taking this and making it now as tall or taller than a man, depending on the man. This thing can weigh as a crane would weigh as much as 26 pounds. It is one of the largest flying birds in the world. Okay, so now this thing is 5 feet tall, weighing almost 30 pounds, so when that hits you, it's going to feel like a steam truck whacked you. Just imagine your 26-pound dog jumping off of something and landing on your head. That's kind of what we got here. Either way, this particular ibis, you know, they say that they can weigh, the cranes can weigh up to 30 pounds, so you can adjust as needed for this bird. An ibis that is 5 or more feet tall, because some of the lore says they're even taller than cranes, with a proportional beak. So the original beak, this guy here, 4 to 6 inches long, 2 feet tall. Now we're going to put this into a 5 foot tall bird. That beak is going to be between 12 and 15 inches long. I don't want to meet this bird personally. Sounds terrifying. And as I mentioned, Hera got mad and cursed the bird, right? Okay. So the feathers are of a metallic substance. Great armor. The beaks are made of bronze, and it is said they would pierce most defenses and armor. Cool. No. There's a report that anyone who was to move against a Stymphalian bird would actually be given a cork shield or cork armor. Cork as in, you know, wine bottle cork, corkboard cork. And I'm not kidding. And there was logic behind this, and I was like, oh, you got something here. The bird would attack the person, and instead of it going through the armor to, you know, unalive the person, it would get its beak stuck in the corkboard, and then when they would use their wings to try to push out, wings being metal too, and they would fray, they would get stuck in the cork. So basically you'd get this bird stuck in a bird net that you use today to catch birds, to tag them and count them and all that stuff. But now you have a very angry, giant, ibis-looking creature stuck in a corkboard. Now what are you going to do with it? They're not immortal, so they, in theory, could be killed, but even once you get this thing on the ground, you're going to have to figure out how to get up underneath the feathers and get to the skin. The skin is said to be of cow leather. So how you off in the bird? So there's a lot going on with these birds right off the bat. It's also said that the screech could stop a man dead in his tracks in pure terror. That's one way to stop your prey so you don't have to chase it, but they were described as horrendously nightmarish creatures. Fun. Glad they don't. These are one of the few that I'm like, you know what, we're good. I don't want these around. Not even as like a nightmare hiding in the corners. Like, these are gone. Good. And according to all of the ancient lore, these birds must have been related to rabbits, because both the ibis and the crane only hatch out 1 to 2, as many as 5, which is uncommon, babies a year. Not quite the way it is with the Stymphalian birds. They bred rapidly and quickly depleted local food sources. As many as, some lore would say, as many as 12 babies at a time, and they could do it twice a year. So think about how fast that would destroy everything in its path. So what happens when you run out of food? You go attack the local village. They were not picky. These birds were not picky. If it was food, it would be eaten. Food as in farm animals, crops, fruit, people. They didn't care. So they were basically a gigantic winged plague upon any land that they were in. The Arcadians were not doing so well. And honestly, are there any redeeming points to these creatures? Not really, unless you have something else to add, which I would be more than willing to hear, because these were entertaining to go over. They were so non-redeeming. It was said that their dung or their poop was toxic to anything it touched. Not good for magic, not good for fertilizer. Just something that should not be running around, thankfully, anymore. And this is where we introduce our hero, Hercules. He had been tasked by King... I always say this name wrong, I'm sorry. Eurystheus, to complete 12 impossible labors. Very difficult, obviously. The Hydra, the Lernaean Hydra, was one of them, and we've already talked about her, and we've talked about a couple of the other ones. So now we're on to this one, which this is called the 6th labor of Hercules. There are a couple of people that call it the 5th, which makes no sense because it's number 6 in all of the base texts. But there were some of the Olympian gods that would say this was not a labor. I'll explain why here in a second. The Stymphalian birds had been plaguing the land of Arcadia and most of the surrounding area for years at this time. The task of removing these birds was seen as damn near impossible. You know, a task for, let's say, a god. Gods are all out. How about a demigod? We got one of those. So we send in Hercules into the swamps of Stymphalia. Mind you, the Stymphalian lake, the swampland is a lot of the stuff that's over here on the side. There we go. It's this up here. And then birds would also be in the trees around. And then there was this section over here where there's this foresty area with the green around it, but it's next to the water. This is also swampland. So this is where these birds were, and then all the little fingerlets, those are all kind of swampy. I couldn't get a good picture online of this thing from an aerial view. This is the best option I could find. So this is where all the birds were hanging out. So off Hercules goes to Stymphalia. He knew that the nests were in the middle of the swamp. Is the primary story. There's other stories that say they were in the trees around the lake and the swamp, but the birds were there. But here lies the problem. The swamp itself, those patches of what looks like land going out into the lake, and along all of the shorelines on both sides where the trees are, weirdly enough, the ground is not strong enough to support a human walking across it, let alone a demigod who's all ripped and burly and big with all of his armor and accoutrements. So he kept going around the swamp trying to figure out a way to get out into, or around the lake, trying to get out into where the nests were, because then they nested in the middle. Kind of smart, really. Oops. And as he circled the swamp, looking for some way to deal with these stupid birds, Athena noticed. She just happened to be scrolling through God TV and found it. Yeah, right. All of Olympus was watching what Hercules was doing. The divide was very clear between those who wanted him to succeed, Zeus and his allies, and Athena and a bunch of the other ones, and those who wanted him to fail, Hera, or, the haters. There was the one supporters, and then we had the haters. Athena was big-time supporter. And she gifted Hercules a special rattle. It is said this rattle was similar to the castanets of Spain, but it was called a crotala. So this is the closest thing I could find from a picture. The images that were sketched were weird. Traditionally, in a lot of the terms used around this time, they were made of wood from this era. But these ones that were given to Hercules were a little bit different. They were made by Hephaestus. Athena had Hephaestus make these on the chance that Hercules would need help. Athena was always thinking ahead. And Hephaestus, being the god of blacksmith and metalworking, there's a few other things tied in there, but that's what he's known for, is, you know, a smith of some form. In some references I read, these could be also termed as finger cymbals, so not quite a castanet, which is the wooden clappers, but this is kind of what we're going with. The other, and this is a modern day one, they're still calling them that, except for the word crotala basically translates, and I'm not being a linguist here, but when you look it up and you start comparing notes, it basically means cymbals. So it's either little cymbals or big cymbals. So what Hercules may have had could have been a full-sized set of bronze cymbals. Keep that in mind for the noise complaint that will be occurring here shortly. But they're kind of cool. There are some references that say specifically a rattle, you know, like the ones you would spin at New Year's Eve that have the little plastic and they go clackety clackety clackety. Just imagine that being bronze and big enough that a demigod could swing it around. Like, it made a lot of noise no matter what you did here. So, bouncing away from the musical aspect of things, because I went down a rabbit hole on that one because it was fun. Once Hercules had his finger cymbals, or crotala, or giant cymbals, depending on which reference you're reading, he went up to a mountain, one of the mountains that I pointed out in the picture, that rose above the swamp and lake. One of the reference sources said he shook his crotala, so it'd have to be one of those like spinning rattly things. Another said he played it, which would be applicable for cymbals. Either way, he raised such a ruckus, and I could only imagine this sight of these things flying into the air. Like, he's up there banging cymbals or carrying on, and these birds just light up. But remember, the wings are metallic, so you're seeing like this shimmery image of copper and bronze flying up. The bills are all bronze, so this copper gold aspect just erupting into the sky, like, it would be kind of cool to see, but at the same time terrifying for the locals. And this is what Hercules wanted: get them off the ground, up into the air. Why? Because as soon as they took flight, he dropped his instrument and knocked an arrow tipped with the Lernaean Hydra blood, and let the arrow fly. Re-knocked and let the next one fly. And the next, and the next. Because their metallic feathers were a perfect shield against standard weapons. But nothing could withstand Lernaean Hydra blood. It was acidic. It would burn right through their feathers. Brings up the question, how did it stick to the arrows and not burn them up? But we're not getting into logic within myth. That doesn't exist. So, as he was knocking and letting loose arrows, birds were dropping from the sky like rain. It was insane how many he got. Eventually, he would take some of the dead birds back to Eurystheus to prove that the task had been completed. Now, side note, apart from the Stymphalian birds, Hercules completed this task, but since Athena had helped him, the haters, led by Hera, wanted the labor to be cancelled. So no number 6. Nope, number 6. Erase that off the board. We're not doing that. Because Hercules was required to complete each task completely alone with no divine help, or mortal help, actually, if we're gonna go by honest notes here. Well, he did the task alone, that part is for sure, and their crotala was a musical instrument. So maybe Athena had given him the instrument to learn a new skill as he was, roaming around doing these hard labors. And it just happened to be the perfect thing to chase away a bunch of annoying birds. Either way, the haters lost, and labor number 6 stands today. So what happened to the Stymphalian birds? There were some people who said that Hercules annihilated them all. I question that because of the numbers that they had, and something that happens at a later date. It is said that they were so flustered from the noise and hunting of Hercules that they fled to the Isle of Arrhodius in the Euxine Sea. There's some words for you, aren't those fun? So this is off of a clay of Hercules going after the birds. I picked this image on purpose. This one actually shows the birds with their long necks and their beaks and carrying on. Most of the other ones have them look like giant eagles or ravens. That's not the description. This is. So, that's why we went with that one. Now, I think this is the one I want. Yep. This island, right here, is the current aerial photo of this. It's right off, it's in the Black Sea, what we call today, and it's off the coast of Turkey, oddly enough. So Greek, yes, but modern day Turkey. And it's also called the Isle of Amazons. It was thought that the Amazonian women used this island for religious fertility rituals. And as a matter of fact, I think I do. This is an aerial view of this island. Has ruins. This is one of the ruins that's on it. There is supposedly either in this one or in this one here, there is a giant black stone that was actually the center aspect of the Amazonians' fertility rituals. That's kind of cool, really. The ruins also, this one here is a this one is a roofless temple, and the temple is where the black stone is. The other one is a military fort that has since been falling apart, and they've also found wine or oil presses. Being that this was heavy Greek area, it could have been either or because they haven't tested the residue, if there's still residue in it. I mean, this is an exceptionally wet environment, so anything that was in them once the top was knocked off has probably been washed away and lost to time. But their overall look, as far as the presses, would have been identical. So either way, oil or wine, not much different. But it's kind of cool that this ties into Amazon as well, the Amazonians. But is this all there is about the Stymphalian birds? Actually, no. Like I said, there's more coming up at a later date, and this is why I would say that Hercules didn't get them all at the lake. The Stymphalian birds show up in the story of Jason and the Argonauts, and when they were searching for the Golden Fleece, they were in the Black Sea, or the other name I never can say right, and while on the journey to the land where the fleece was guarded by a dragon, yes, there's dragons in that story, Hera, being Hera, sent a wind against the Argonauts. I really want to go into a deep dive, but she has so much vile history. I'm sure it's jilted lover thing because Zeus was, such a paragon of virtue, but she's really ruthless in how she responds to things. She sent a giant wind against the ship. The lore says more verbatim is, by the will of Hera, so she sent them to the isle. Her goal, smash them against the rocks to unalive them. She also knew that the birds were still there, and so if the rocks didn't get them, the birds would. The Stymphalian birds saw this boat just come trucking in on a wind, and they decided they were not having this. So another little thing that Herod gifted these birds was that they could throw their feathers like arrows. Have some of that. So they were hurling their razor sharp feathers at the Argonauts as they were coming unwillingly to their island. The birds have been breeding on this island, so their numbers went from a handful that escaped back to their enormous numbers again, and they would go back to the shore because the island itself was only like 2 miles from shore. You can see it from Turkey, like it's in the bay type of a thing, kind of like Alcatraz. So the birds were able to go to shore, get food, and continue to breed ridiculous numbers. So a prophet, before Jason and the Argonauts took off, told them, if you ever have issues with birds, do the following. And weird, because they were like, what birds would we need that much protection from? Ding, ding, ding. The Stymphalian birds. So they would bang their swords on their shields, and the noise, much like with Hercules and his Crotala, the birds fled the noise, couldn't handle it. So they fled basically to the mainland to get away from all the chaos. And this allowed the Argonauts to land on the island, where they found some injured and unclothed men. And after tending to the wounds, because these other guys had crashed there just a little bit before Jason and his buddies showed up, and the birds hadn't fully eaten them yet. So Jason and his crew cleaned up the injured, got everyone clothed, healed up a little bit, and then they would take them off the island and continue on to their destination. They dropped the guys off where they were supposed to be, but then the Argonauts would continue. And there was one other story, and this is not as well known. The common story is Hercules went to the swamp, chased them all out, and they ended up on the island. But another random story, as I was sorting through everything about the Stymphalian birds and how they ended up on the island, is Bellerophon, the man who tamed the mighty Pegasus, was tasked with removing the birds from the swamp. Athena sent him with a special flute made by Hephaestus. It is said this flute made a haunting song. I'm guessing, considering these birds didn't like cacophonies and noises, that the song wasn't just haunting, that it was probably a little discordant as well, so there were some harmonics that may have been a little off. And so this, basically playing this flute, drove these birds into a complete frenzy, and they fled the swamp to get away from the cacophony that was coming from our buddy Beller, and they would eventually land on the island in the Black Sea. It's not a very common myth. I only found 1 or 2 references, where the more common one when you look them up is Hercules and his tasks. And interesting, as some lore goes, they kind of disappear from history. No one really knows what happened to them. Once the Greeks kind of faded a little bit and the Romans took up, the stories of the Stymphalian birds pretty much disappeared. There is some theory, and I like how we try to, and I say we, as in the last 200 to 300 years or so, possibly as late as 500 years ago, try to apply modern day sensibilities to the ancient cultures. And what I mean by that is, in one of the stories that I was going through, they kept referencing, and when I say they, a person who was trying to understand what these birds might have been or meant, in the recent times, said that they figured that these birds were actually how did he put that? I didn't write it down. This was just something I was like, oh, I'll remember that. Yeah, famous last words. That they were a symbol of the untamed dangers and risks of the natural world and how we as humans, i.e. Hercules, had to tame and rein in our baser natures, and the power over nature is the most important part. Okay, someone needs to settle down. It was just very pompous is how they were coming across. These stories, in a lot of cases, if they were 100% made up stories, were ways to basically understand the natural world. I'll give them that. But is it an allegory about how we have to conquer and destroy? Not fully. Because if that was the case, then Hercules wouldn't have been the one doing it. We would have, as humanity, not the gods. And the birds were actually set loose, pick your poison, Athena, Ares, or Hera, by the gods onto humans. So what were they talking about? Was there a plague of giant, hard-to-kill flying monstrous birds at one point? Who knows? Maybe. It's kind of cool to think about, or horrifying. You can decide. Cool or horrifying. I think cool. But they have tried to apply what we would think today to the ancient Greeks. There is some reference back in some of the older philosophers that they were talking about overcoming an obstacle from the sky. Cool. Well, was that birds or was it aliens? Because there's been some theories that the Olympians might have been less than gods and way more than man, but maybe not from this planet. So there's some theory. There's like reading through it, I had theories, and that's some of my theories. There's what were they describing? Was it a threat from the sky? Was it something that was hiding in plain sight that was being destructive? I don't quite buy the modern concept that it was written as an allegory to conquering natural forces and conquering the inner demons that we carry. They were outside. That's the part with the inner part of it that makes no sense. And they were a threat to life and limb. So, again, was there something there at one point? Possibly, but they have kind of gratefully died off since then. So from here, they do disappear from time, really, until pop culture comes along. Of course it does. They crop up in the Age of Mythology games. Rick Riordan brings them back into the fold with his Camp Half-Blood Chronicle book series. This one this one made me giggle, considering what we've described these creatures as and what they were and how terrifying they were to everyone, Hydra women and children type thing. The Stymphalian birds are actually a character in Pokemon. And I'm not making this up, I double checked it. It actually influences one of the characters named Skarmory. And don't come for me if I say that wrong, I don't play Pokemon. And they said influenced the going back through the literature on it. It actually says that they used some of the Stymphalian references to create this creature, and I thought that was hysterical. And for those of you who are over 30 years old, if you happen to have watched back in the 90s Xena Warrior Princess and the other show that was on at the same time, which was Hercules The Legendary Journeys, there was an episode where they had a single Stymphalian bird that still was roaming around the area, but they showed it like a leftover dinosaur, kind of like pterodactyl-ish. Still referenced, just not very well to me. There are some detractors against the Stymphalian birds. There are those in history who say they were never birds. They were the daughters of Stymphалus and Ornis. It is claimed that they were normal women who had the affliction of bird-like feet or legs. What? Sounds kind of like they're trying to say that the Stymphalian birds were harpies, or thereabouts. Still including Hercules within the story, but they changed, the more modern view changed the story, that the Stymphalian harpies were hunted because they didn't welcome Hercules with open arms and open something. You can fill in the blank like he would have. The term they used was not receiving them hospitably. Oh, poor babies. There's a lot that could be unpacked in that alternative story. That's not the purpose of what I'm doing tonight anyway. It is side lore, but like seriously, that's what you guys come up with? Well, they weren't really birds. They were some women that had bird-like feet. That doesn't explain the gigantic beaks, the metal feathers, and killing everything in sight. Nice try, but no. Sorry, that doesn't work that way. Now, on to the tarot. And we'll do a little midstream grifty here. If you're new to the channel, please hit that like and subscribe button. Comment if you're watching this on replay or live. Just let me know what your thoughts are if you've heard of these birds. What your thoughts on which of the 3 origin stories make the most sense to you personally. And there are some links in the description. One is for the tarot deck that I use for this stream, which is the Tarot Art Nouveau. And then there's some other little goodies that I was rooting around finding. For being as much in pop culture as they are attributed, the Stymphalian birds do not have as much merch as you would think. So there's a couple of books and some literature about them, but that's about the size of it. And then there's also a book down there, and I've read a version of this, so I'm not sure if this is the exact same one because I don't have my physical copy with me. But it's the 6 Labors of Hercules. It's not the full 12. It's kind of like a partial version, kind of a get you started type thing. There is a full text on it, but it's massive. So if you're interested, those are in the description, and just clicking through those does help support the channel a little bit, so I do appreciate all of that. With that, we'll get started with the reading. And when I do these readings, obviously they're for fun. I'm doing them for the Stymphalian birds, and I use the basic Celtic cross reading, so that's how we'll work through it. And the first card it's the significator, so this is the Stymphalian birds themselves. It's a 2 of Swords. So wherever they're at, they're just they don't really care. They know that there's some illusions. They know that they're hidden. They could be hiding behind the veil in the astral plane. They're kind of feeling themselves. There's a little bit of ego going on, but they're in a group. They're with each other and they're together, so they don't really care what anyone else thinks. They're like, you know what, we are out of your chaotic world. We got our food, we got our thing, we're good. Stay out. The thing that's crossing them, their obstacles or their challenge, oops, gotta edit this one. The thing that's going against them is there's a little bit of apathy. And the apathy is actually coming from our world. The things in the astral are still connected here. And when they get forgotten here, they fade from there. So what's working against them is the fact that they actually have kind of faded away. There's only a handful of places that are still talking about them. They think they're fine, that they're going to last forever, no one can bother them. But the reality is the obstacle, the thing that's working against them, is people don't care anymore. And they're forgetting the nightmare of a 5+ foot tall burnished bird that's made out of metal that is destroying the land. People don't think about such things anymore. And so their anchor here in this world is starting to slip and fade, which also means they will start to slip and fade. Their higher self influence is the 5 of Wands. They've lost their passion for what they do. And the reason I have my finger over certain parts of the cards is I love this deck, but there's a little bit of racy stuff on them, so I have to make sure that's covered up. But their higher self is saying you've lost that fire. The Wands are the fire energy, and the 5 of Wands is basically like the fire's gone out. The passion is kind of melted away. It's not there anymore, and they are stuck in this idea of the past. They don't realize that If they don't keep up going forward, they actually lose. And that's where they're at in that respect. Their lower self, their subconscious, or the root energy type thing, is the Six of Wands. Their ego's still in the way. Their shadow is still saying, like, we don't need the past. We don't need any of that. That stuff is old. We are still the hot new thing. No one knows who you are anymore, guys. Sorry to call you out. But the Six of Wands in this aspect, especially in this position, is saying there's a little bit of an ego trip going on. Like, their shadow is actually lying to them and not letting them know the real story. And so when they have that far off, oh, I just don't care about what's going on today, because, you know, we are the thing. It's the significator, the Two of Swords, but their ego is feeding that. It makes the Five of Wands a much harder thing to get them to reconnect back into the modern time. Their history, and we'll go with a 200-year window. They're not immortal, so we will stick with the 200 years. They are very long-lived, which was why it was such a problem they bred so fast. Is the Two of Wands. Their history is a little bit coy. Like, they kind of disappeared, and that's what they wanted, and it allowed people to forget about them, and they thought that that was a good thing. Oh, if they forget about us, that means that we can do whatever we want, and if we decide to come back, they will have no defense against us. Wrong. But that's kind of how they think about the history here, their past. Their immediate future is the King of Wands. Their passion is still there, and it may get fired back up, but it's not going to be an all-consuming movement, is what I'm seeing. It's going to be something that is slow build, kind of like that banked fire. When you add one more stick, it just starts to get warmer, and that's the energy that's coming up here. Is their immediate future, there's some things that could be warming it up, but there's some things that have to happen beforehand, and there's a little bit of desperation in it. Like, there is something calling to them. The king is sitting on his throne, like, I got this, but there's some desperation that's coming forward as well, saying, please hurry up, we don't have a lot of time. And it could be, you know, one of the birds is starting to realize that, hey, my wing is see-through, what's going on? So there could be some of that going on too. Their attitude, general attitude, not just their core, but their general attitude, is the Ten of Pentacles. In the concept of this one, it's almost like they just don't care. They've done what they felt they needed to do. That's why they went into the other side, because they don't feel that they have any other purpose here. 10 equals completion, but it's also the offer of a new beginning. So they've already been through the process, and they're just not, their attitude is kind of like, we just don't want to anymore. So there's this theory, or this feeling, that they're actually okay with fading away completely. There's parts of this reading that are saying that's not okay, but that's kind of their attitude right now. Like, they're just okay with it. They don't care. You know, their environment, which is where they're currently residing as a group, as a culture, is the Knight of Wands. There's a lot of movement that is possible for them. Their environment is kind of pushing them to step up, to move forward, to get things going. It's just a matter of them taking the hint and going with it. But right now, it doesn't look like there's a lot there's a lot pushing them. They just don't have the motivation to do anything about it. They're kind of in that, like, we're good, we're safe, we're fine, who cares? I don't want to work that hard anymore, so we're just going to chill. Not always the best decision if you want to be remembered down the road. Their hopes and fears. The Four of Chalices. This one is an interesting one, considering everything so far has been air and fire, almost with a little bit of earth tied in. The Four of Chalices is water, and so it's kind of an emotional thing. Like, they're daydreaming. Like, they don't think that, oh, the bad stuff will never happen. It's fine. We're fine. It's not a big deal. So they're just kind of like, whatever. But they've got this, like, fantasy thing. When you look at her face, she's kind of like, I'm just not even connected. I am so done. I'm out. I'm going to be over here doing my thing. And that's kind of the energy that I'm getting is, So their overall outcome is 17. I hate Roman numerals in some cases. And it is the stars. And with this one, it's basically saying that they have the option to step back in. When you talk about the stars in this with this collection, they can reach for the stars. They have that many opportunities. They have that many options. Count the stars. Good luck. And that's what their options are. Their outcome is basically, do you want this or not? You have the ability. You have this high frequency energy being offered to you, being brought in for you to help you reconnect to this world, to reconnect to existing in a physical state. Please don't. But they have the option that's being offered to them. And the other part that's coming up with the stars is the Olympians left. And this is saying that there's help from the stars, wherever the Olympians are from, coming back in saying, we might support you if you are willing to step back into the world. And that's where they are having the struggle. The Stymphalian birds went through a lot. They were chased out of every homeland that they ever had. They were forgotten by history for a lot of years. And now that we're starting to understand them more, do they want to come back? And that's the part where that's on them. So, with that, if you enjoyed this episode, please drop a like. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments, as if you watch this on replay, let me know what your thoughts are, if this is the birds are interesting or not, because I personally found them fascinating, but I also found it interesting that they were referenced a lot, but there wasn't a lot of unique art forms out there. Most of them were, as I showed this image here earlier, and there was a few pots, that one of which is replicated in the description you can purchase, which I thought was pretty interesting. But the majority of what I was finding was vague descriptions and a lot of associations with Hercules or the Argonauts, which, of course, that's the primary stories of them. But the art, for being classified as some of the most described beings in Greek history, there wasn't a lot of art, and I was looking specifically for it. Now, when you hop forward couple thousand years, to our time, you start seeing imagery related to it with deviant art. There's a lot on there. So it's modern art. You also see it popping up in things like D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. There's a few interesting arts through there. There's some that look like they should be on Magic the Gathering cards, just the way the backgrounds were, and they have that specific water oil color aspect to them. There's a lot of modern day descriptions and art, but most of the old stuff, there's a handful of images, either with Jason and the Argonauts or of Hercules going against him with an bow and arrow. But that's about all I could find. So the descriptions and the images that I showed you here are the most common collected versions of them, because each one had a slightly different aspect. I just put them all together. So with that, I'll let you guys go. Have a great rest of your evening. Have a safe, if you're in the United States, Memorial Day weekend. It's the end of it, but be safe out there anyway. If you haven't checked it out yet, yesterday on Sunday, I do weekly rune readings for the week based off of the elements, so that'll give you an idea of what your elemental sign is, and also the energy of going forward for this week. So you can check that out. There'll be videos dropping for sure tomorrow, but possibly the rest of the week. I have to see what my calendar looks like. But with that, I will let you guys go. Have a great rest of your week. Button, who's got the button?